InspirED Virtual Learning Series. Welcome to InspirED. As we continue to watch the COVID-19 pandemic evolve in Ohio, this school year looks different for everyone. And that is why InspirED was created by the Ohio Department of Education's Office for Exceptional Children and OCALI. Because you are here with us today, we know that you are interested in expanding your knowledge and capacity through online learning. So we also want you to know about OCALICon Line, the nation's premier Autism and Disabilities conference. While we usually bring thousands of people together in Columbus, Ohio each year, this year we're doing it all virtually. Registration is open now. We invite you to join us November 11th through 13th. Head over to ocali.org to learn more. Welcome, and thanks for joining us. We are excited to connect with you as part of the InspirED Virtual Learning Series. This series is dedicated to providing timely information and resources to professionals and families supporting students, including those with disabilities, in a virtual learning environment. The content of this webinar has been pre-recorded, but we want to encourage your participation. If you have any questions or comments, we invite you to be part of the discussion by using the chat feature. Questions will be answered throughout the webinar, and later we'll be providing a link in the chat to a brief survey. By completing the survey, you'll be able to access a certificate verifying your attendance in this webinar.
Good afternoon, and welcome to today's InspirED session, Mythbusting Transition Assessment. Today, it will be myself, Alex Corwin, from the Lifespan Transition Center here at OCALI. I am the Secondary Transition and Workforce Manager, and joining me today are Chris and Amy.
Hi, I'm Chris Filler, and I am the Program Director for the Lifespan Transition Center at OCALI.
And I'm Amy Szymanski, the Secondary Transition and Workforce Development Consultant with the Ohio Department of Education's Office for Exceptional Children.
All right, so today we'll be talking about transition assessment. And what is transition assessment? The Division on Career Development and Transition of the Council for Exceptional Children defines transition assessment as an ongoing process of collecting data on the individual's needs, preferences, and interests as they relate to the demands of current and future working, educational, living, and personal and social environments. This definition describes a process of gathering information and not necessarily what kind of assessment should be used, how you assess, or who is completing the assessments. And there's a reason for this. Transition assessment needs to be individualized both in how we gather the data and who may be gathering it. But ultimately, the process must focus on what skills and abilities the students will need both now for their current environment and for their future adult lives. It is also ongoing, so we'll need to assess in an ongoing fashion. As students have various experiences, services, and assessments that provide updates to their strengths, preferences, interests, and needs, we'll need to continue assessing based on those updates. Now, with a somewhat vague definition that describes a process and not necessarily an assessment, it's not surprising that transition assessment has developed some myths. Today, we hope to bust those myths and highlight the best practices that should be utilized in their place. And Amy is going to help introduce our myths today.
Thanks, Alex. So first, we will look at the first myth that is floating around, and it involves the selection of the transition assessment tools. So we'll say that myth number one is that we must use the same approved transition assessment tool for all of our students with disabilities.
Well, the truth is actually that transition assessment tools should be individually selected for each student. There really is no single tool or one magical transition assessment that must be used for all students with disabilities. So selecting the right tools is accomplished by using a transition assessment planning process, which begins with a team discussion about the type of assessment data that is needed. Guiding questions for the team discussion include things like, what do we currently know about the student's preferences, interests, needs, skills, strengths, or what we call the PINs? And what else do we need to know about the student's PINs? And then finally, how much information do we have about the youth's adult life goals for ongoing education, adult employment, and adult living. These discussions will surface gaps in the team's knowledge of important information about that youth, and the gaps become the target for age-appropriate transition assessment, the areas that need to be further explored. This process, the transition assessment planning process, is an ongoing cycle, which is represented by the graphic on the screen. This process leads the family and the team through a series of steps. As we just discussed, it begins with gathering and reviewing existing information about the youth's strengths, challenges, their emerging interests, sometimes about their academic performance, supports and accommodations, life experiences, and what they know about their vision for the future. All of that is where you start. Then the team engages in discussion of the youth's adult life goals with the youth, family, and the rest of the team. Now, be aware that early in the process, there may be a few or actually no goals, or perhaps the goals might seem or feel a little bit immature, but it is the place to start. This is where we begin. As the cycle continues, the team builds or refines the youth profile by continuing to explore those pins while emphasizing information that is related to the adult life goals. Now remember, you use the lens of adulthood as you discuss and explore the pins, always asking, what does this mean, or what could this mean in relation to the adult life? At this point, the team also has the opportunity to discuss the alignment of the student's proposed adult goals to the student's identified preferences and skills, and to the youth's areas of challenge or need. As the profile develops, the youth has the opportunity to actually refine the goals to better align with the skills and strengths. And the team has the opportunity to target areas of weakness for instruction and skill development. We are going to look at the next stages in the cycle as we move through this webinar. But as we explore transition assessment planning process, we are reminded of what that true purpose of transition assessment is. That primary purpose is to use data. Use data to develop adult life goals, begin and continue the transition planning process, identify gaps between current skills and skills needed for the future, and identify the types of transition services and instruction that will be needed to address those gaps. And finally, the purpose of ongoing transition assessment is to help the team refine the adult life goals and transition plan as needed. So to be effective, we need to assure we are carefully considering the student and asking the right questions about the student so that we're choosing the transition assessment tools that will surface the meaningful and useful information that addresses the purpose of transition assessment. So the next step in the cycle is for the team to craft those important questions. This step in the planning process calls for the team to identify questions that need to be answered in order to continue building that profile, refining the life goals, and identifying those services and instruction. So questions might be things like, we need to know more about his areas of interest, or does she really understand the academic rigor associated with that career path? That's a really important question to understand. We also might ask, we need to understand more about the type of technology that will assist her in the academic performance. Or perhaps we might ask, we need to identify what employment environments are best suited for her sensory needs. Or even, what is it about a train conductor that is so interesting to him? Maybe you would find that it's really more about the mechanics of the train, or perhaps even more about wearing that conductor uniform than actually being the conductor. Each one of these questions is answered using different tools and methods. So remember, there is no single tool or transition assessment that you will always use for all students. So best practice is using a process and choosing assessment tools and methods that will answer those questions. We have created a list of all the resources that we will mention in this webinar, and we will put the link in the chat box as we move through the session. It will also be available on the website where the recorded webinar will be posted. So the first tool is an Ohio Employment First product called Planning for Transition Assessment, a guide for multi-agency teams. This guide walks a team through the steps of the planning process and offers a form where the team can record the questions and the tools or methods needed to answer the questions. Now, this tool also provides a great deal of information about the process that you can use to improve your practice, whether the team chooses to record the information in the form or not. On the screen is a similar document or form to the Transition Assessment Team Planning Guide that we just looked at. It is the Transition Assessment Planning Form for students with significant disabilities. It includes several areas of transition assessment to consider and walks the team through a similar process of asking questions and identifying needed tools to answer the questions. This tool, the Transition Success Assessment, can be used to help a team gather information about specific skills, behaviors, or actions that can then lead to the identification of those really important areas that you might want to go in more deeply and ask more questions about. The results can be summarized in a grid and that allows the team to identify areas of most concern that should be discussed by the entire team. The target domains may then become the targets for the development of more transition assessment questions that require more information. So it's really continuing that process of gathering more information about questions that are important to understanding the youth's PINs. Finally, the National Technical Assistance Center on Transition, or NTACT, offers the AATA, Age Appropriate Transition Assessment Toolkit. This document offers guidance in the types of information that a team may want to consider gathering, and it also offers a variety of tools to assist in gathering that information. All these resources and more are in the Mythbusting Transition Assessment Resources handout. The link for this resource is in the chat box. Now we're ready to move on to the next myth.
Okay, so we know that there is no one transition assessment tool, and that best practice is to use a planning process for transition assessment. Myth number 1 is busted. So let's look at myth number 2. And myth number 2 is that we must use one formal and one informal assessment.
The truth is, transition assessment data should be gathered from a variety of sources in order to uncover important information that helps provide insight into the student's PINs and provide information that can help the team develop post-secondary goals and identify needed transition services. Both formal and informal assessments can be useful depending on the information that is needed. There is no rule that says you need to use one formal and one informal tool. The team needs to decide what they need to know about the student's PINs as it relates to their adult life goals, and then select the best tool to discover that information, which will ultimately be transition assessment data. So what's the difference between a formal and informal assessment? A formal assessment is a standardized instrument that includes descriptions of their norming process, reliability and validity, and recommended uses. Examples could include aptitude tests, career vocational assessments, and adaptive behavior scales. Informal assessments generally provide descriptive information but lack formal norming procedures. These examples could include interviews, questionnaires, structured observations, work-based observations, and simulations. But remember, informal doesn't mean unplanned or random. It still must be structured both as an activity and as how we will document and observe that activity. There needs to be a level of intentionality as to what we are trying to find out about the student in relation to their adult life goals. Now, there are several ways to bring structure to informal assessment, so it is more intentional, thoughtful, and helps gather that accurate and sought-after data. The career discovery process is a person-centered assessment and planning process that determines a job seeker's preferences, interests, strengths, resulting in a career discovery profile. It's a team approach to get to know the person in depth and includes informal assessments like interviews and social and vocational observations. On the Ohio Employment First website, there is a package of career discovery tools that can be used to help formalize these informal assessments like social and vocational observations. They include an interview form, a vocational observation form, and a social situational observation form. These tools will help make work and community experiences more intentional, planned, individualized, and connect to the post-secondary goals for a student. One of my favorite career discovery tools within this Employment First Toolkit is the Employment Skills Observation Report. We always advocate for students to have as many community and employment training opportunities and experiences as possible so they can understand the world of work, whether that be technical skills that are needed for a job or soft skills like courtesy and showing up on time. The Employment Skills Observation Report gives structure for the observer, whether it be a job coach, a teacher, or even a family member. And it is helpful to take notes on all the skills that are going to be needed to successfully obtain and maintain a job. So having a pre-populated list of those skills when observing a student makes it easier to take notes. If a youth's entire team is using the same form, then they can continue to help the youth identify their progress in areas of improvement across many experiences, providers, and partners. So for example, if a student is struggling with handling stress and problem solving during their first work experience, the observer can make note of that on this observation report. The data can then lead to a focus on improving those skills before the next work experience. Now, the observation report can be used to focus on documenting in detail how the student displays his handling of stress and problem solving, and then allows for other partners, providers, and services to document on the same form, utilizing and detailing the same different skills. Some other resources to help you formalize informal assessment outside of the career discovery tools we just reviewed include OCALI's updated employability life skills assessment called the ELSA. There is a version for professionals and family members to document observations and notes on the same document that can be compared over several observations to show improvement in areas of growth. Ohio Means Jobs has a nice interview tool on their website. In order to access the interview module, a student or youth would have to have an OMJ, Ohio Means Jobs backpack. This is a nice virtual tool to allow students to complete an online job interview and receive feedback. The OMJ backpack has many other tools and resources for the virtual environment, so don't let creating the backpack become a barrier, but maybe rather a gateway to practice the job interview module and access many other tools. And lastly, don't forget the Ohio AATA Library, the Age Appropriate Transition Assessment Library. There are many formal assessments and additional forms and guidance for informal assessments that can be found at the AATA website at ohioaatalibrary.org.
So now that we have defined the transition assessment, we discussed it as an ongoing process and have given you some formal and informal tools to help, it may seem pretty overwhelming. We have to consider our students' individualized planning needs and the ongoing process for each student to complete, so it could be very daunting to think about. However, it brings us to another transition assessment myth. And that's myth number 3, which is I need to gather and record or document all of this data by myself.
Well, Amy, the truth is a team is able to use valid data from many different sources to respond to the questions posed by that team and to assist in transition planning for the student's adult life. Alex already sort of gave us a hint that that was not true, that myth that we just reviewed, and that the truth is you can use valid data from any source. The IEP teams should look for opportunities to use data from those multiple sources to expand upon and define the student's strengths, preferences, interests, and needs. You need to continue to look at those. For example, you could consider data from information that you receive from the general education teachers or from therapists or counselors. Looking at structured observations during activities during the day could be helpful, and information from services provided by other agencies or partners also can be part of that transition assessment data. So yes, the truth is you really don't have to do this by yourself. Connect with partners and identify opportunities that have the potential to provide rich and what I call authentic data about that youth. Multi-agency partners and the family work together with the school to analyze that information gathered by these multiple partners in order to answer the transition assessment questions. Together, these teams identify what the information tells them about the potential impact on future adult life, as well as what this means in terms of the current focus of education and service and support during those transition years. When you use this approach, a team is implementing transition assessment as it was defined right at the beginning of this webinar, an ongoing process of collecting data on needs and preferences and interests as they relate to both current and future demands. So we have already reviewed several resources that a school can use with their partner agencies and organizations and families. Alex discussed discovery process tools and the ELSA. Informal assessment opportunities in non-school environments can also provide authentic and important information about that youth. In this time of COVID, where in-school or school-related activities are limited, tapping into those experiences and information of others becomes even more valuable. So who might you want to consider as you think about this transition assessment team? Well, family members goes without saying, but then there is Ohio Means Jobs, opportunities for Ohioans with disabilities or OOD counselors, vendors or providers of OOD services. What about healthcare providers? Physicians and nurses can provide information. Of course, there is your County Board of Developmental Disability that you would want to include. And if there are respite care providers, they have great information. Community counselors and therapists that a youth might work with, you would want to tap into their knowledge. And then you may not think about this often, but what about leaders of extracurricular activities, coaches, people that would see the youth in a different way than maybe what you would? Faith-based organizations or groups that the youth might participate in could also provide information. And then there is the Family Children First Councils. They might know the youth, or they might know about resources that could assist the youth in future planning. So the possibilities are endless. Don't stop here. As you learn more about who the youth interacts with, consider how those people could provide rich transition assessment data. So let's take a look at just a few tools that support multi-agency transition assessment. This tool was definitely designed with partners in mind. This is the vocational planning tool developed by the Medina CAPS team. That's Collaborating Agencies for Post-Secondary Success. The intention of this tool is to pull data from any of those vocational assessment or work experiences to be able to communicate that important information that was surfaced during those assessments or experiences or observations. The focus is to identify what we call conditions for success. Love that, conditions for success for a student based on their preferences, interests, needs, and skills and strengths. And then to be able to share that progress with the entire team to make recommendations for the next steps. This vocational planning tool is available on the Ohio Employment First website. Another tool that could be useful when working with partners in the virtual world, or even when we are able to come together in person, is the Secondary School Success Checklist from the Center on Secondary Education for Students with Autism Spectrum Disorders. This tool can be used by students, families, and schools or agency staff, anyone really, to help identify priorities and goal areas when you're planning that life after high school. This tool has several versions that are tailored for each team member, similar to the ELSA, but the tool is different. The person completing the tool assesses the profile of the youth in each of these skill areas, and then also identifies the priority of that skill to future adult life success to help narrow that target for service and instruction. Tools that gather data from different perspectives and different experiences not only add richness to the information, but they also take the responsibility off of just one or two people and streamline the gathering of the data. So honestly, it is very clear that using data from a variety of partners is not only acceptable, it is the best practice. And the final resource in this section is actually a video. It's a video of one student's journey through transition. This is Gabby's journey, and it highlights a multi-agency approach to transition planning. The teamwork that is highlighted in the video is an authentic representation of how a multi-agency team can work together to assist each other and ultimately assist the youth to a better adult life outcome. So, Amy, let's recap our transition assessment myths.
All right. Well, thanks, Chris. Our busted myths for transition assessment include: number 1, we must use the same approved transition assessment for all our students with disabilities. Busted. We must use one formal and informal assessment. Also busted. And third, I need to gather and record or document all of the data all by myself. Busted.
Now, the truth is, transition assessment is a process where we understand first what we are trying to discover about the student's PINs in relationship to their adult life goals, and then engage in assessment, activity, or structured observation to continue building the student's profiles, PINs, and transition plan. Every step of the transition assessment planning process is equally important. We must remember that transition assessment is an ongoing process, as indicated by our cycle for transition assessment planning. We want to continue helping them along the path to employment, whether that be building skills or seeking additional education. And we can utilize IEP team members, partner agencies, educators, mentors, club leaders, and anyone else who may be able to record observational data to show the use PINs in a variety of settings. There are tools in the resource handout in the chat, along with partners to assist with transition assessment data and planning for students with disabilities. Some partners we mentioned today and others that can help include OCALI's Lifespan Transition Center, Ohio's Employment First website for transition planning, the Ohio Department of Education's Secondary Transition and Workforce Development webpage, OMJ, Ohio Means Jobs K-12 Backpack, OOD, Opportunities for Ohioans with Disabilities, Transition Services, and Ohio Transition Support Partnership, and Ohio Self-Determination Association. Now, these tools that we've discussed and that will be in the handout will not be appropriate for all of your students. But the more tools you're aware of, the better you'll be able to individualize assessment and transition planning for all of your students by choosing the correct assessment and tools that will be appropriate for each specific student. And we realize reframing myths about transition assessment can take some time. So the place to start may be addressing just one myth, or perhaps trying a new approach with one student as the place to begin. Allow yourself some time to understand and feel confident in transition assessment planning. I just want to say thank you for joining us today. I hope you're able to finally bust some of those myths about transition assessment planning and replace them with best practices.
Thanks for participating in today's webinar. We've provided a link in the chat to a brief survey, and we'll also follow up by email with the same link and additional information about this series. This series is for you, and we welcome any feedback. By completing the survey, you'll be able to access a certificate verifying your attendance in this webinar. This recording and related resources will be available on demand through our website, ocali.org. There, you'll also find upcoming and past episodes of InspirED, and you can keep the conversation going on social media. Find us at OCALI Official on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and by using the hashtag InspirEdOhio. As we move forward together in virtual learning, our connections help to inspire success. InspirED, Virtual Learning Series.